interesting and topical theme. We are discussing essentially European integration, but looking at it in the context of the emerging, what we could call centrifugal forces, both from the Union and within the Union. And we have a brilliant panel of experts. We will start first of all with Professor Closa from the European University Institute, that will discuss first of all the context of secession.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Can you hear me right? Okay. So thank you very much for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here in this wonderful place and sharing the session with such a distinguished scholars and also with all the colleagues attending this today. What I'm going to do is to reflect in two topics that apparently are not necessarily related. Nevertheless, what I'm going to try to make, although very briefly, is to suggest that there is a kind of analytical connection between secession and withdrawal. And I will try to make the case, and you may argue that perhaps I am not very successful in doing this case. Then I would like to say a few things about secession, and particularly not considering the merits of the cases which are now on the table. As you know, the Scottish case, we had the referendum a few days ago, and the Catalan case, which is still pending. Apparently, tomorrow, the Catalan government is going to convoke the vote for the 9th of November, and the Spanish government has already announced that there will be immediately a recourse to the Constitutional Court, which would mean that the vote will be immediately interrupted. But nevertheless, in either case, I think this will be the last episode, the last stage of this saga of independentism. And because of that, what I want to suggest that it makes sense to reflect from the European Union point of view of what is the meaning of secession and why the European Union, which is my really underlying line, is why the European Union should have a kind of policy towards secession within member states, which is slightly different to the question of secession outside the European Union. And the third point I'm going to touch upon very briefly, although this topic I have been writing a little bit in the last year, concerns withdrawal. And this is a very specific case that has been raised by the United Kingdom Conservative Party and also United Kingdom Independence Party. Sometimes we tend to think in terms of United Kingdom policy, but rather it has to be associated with these two parties that make the proposal rather than being a specific United Kingdom policy. And I would like to make the reflection of this process of withdrawal within the meaning of Article 50, which is the one that regulates in the European Union Treaty the possibility of a state leaving the Union. And here, of course, there is already a European Union policy decision, which is specifically the one stated by Article 50. And here I would like to argue that, contrary to what may be thought in certain circles in the United Kingdom, withdrawal is not the optimum solution to the United Kingdom, precisely because the strong hand that Article 50 gives to the remainder of the Union in any possible solution, leaving aside the practical and real consequences of withdrawal. So, to start with the first issue, which is the analogies between secession and withdrawal. And prima facie we may think that there are not a lot of similarities, analogies, because one of the possibilities which is withdrawal is regulated in formal terms by a legal instrument, by Article 50 of the Treaty, while secession normally is not regulated by constitutions. So, I'm not mistaken, in the history of world constitutions, there are very few of them that regulated secession from a state. I remember that the Soviet Union contemplated this possibility, which of course was a forced possibility, and in a very different way, and I want to underline that, the constitution of the Union of the States of Serbia and Montenegro had the same provision. But this case, which is always taken as a kind of precedent or antecedent, is not real, because as the instrument say, it was a union of the states that already foresee the possibility of dissolution of the same. So the question here is that withdrawal is formally regulated, secession is not, and nevertheless, what I would like to say is that the possibility is only legally feasible, formally feasible here in the case of the United Kingdom, precisely because the absence of a so-called written constitution, even though some other people prefer the term of commentary constitution, the lack of a specific document in which the set of basic rules governing in the political life of the country is set. For any other country having a written constitution, of course there are no provisions on secession, but furthermore, my point here, and it's something I'm going to argue deeply, but I think it's a common sense point, is that secession is highly contrary to the spirit of a written constitution. Perhaps the Spanish case for this is the most obvious one. The argument made in Spain by many people is that the idea of secession runs deeply against the spirit of having a So, this is to say that the Scottish case in terms of secession is a highly unique case. I shouldn't be taken as the precedent to build a European Union policy on the issue. No other case would be ever like the Scottish case. First, because there will be always a written constitution, and second, because I doubt that the kind of political agreement reached in the Scottish case will be ever reached everywhere else. But the analogy between both processes, in my opinion, is that both the secession rules, as were proposed in the British Congress, and the Montero rules, permit those who defend those two options argue that it's possible to bargain a new status quo that is normally presented as a win-win situation, a situation in which whatever is bad will get better, whatever is better will remain the same. And of course, I have strong arguments opposing that. What interests me here is that the rules governing these two processes are similar in the way that proponents of those two positions can sustain this kind of argument. Now, let's start on secession. Why does it matter for the European Union? It does matter because the basis of the argument for those two cases have been more vocal in the proposal for getting independent with the European Union, Scottish and the Catalan case, are made the same point, which is the continued membership of the European Union. In other terms, no one of them really thinks of independence outside the European Union. And the lemma in the Catalan case is very clear, even the question in the referendum, to be a new state in Europe, meaning the European Union. Now the question here is that, of course, either of these territories, Catalonia, Scotland, but also applies to any other territory within the current European Union, is by definition a European territory. So there is not any doubt that these territories, if they regain independence, will become members of the European Union. Hence the question is slightly different, is how membership can be achieved. And there are two alternatives here. One is the second one, which I propose, or which is not proposed, it's written in the second line in this slide, which is the ordinary view to become a member of the European Union, which is via Article 49, negotiating accession to the European Union and passing through a process of ratification of this accession treated as an instrument by all member states. The key element here is the seceding territory, the new independent state, negotiate from outside of the European Union. And hence, leverage in terms of negotiation is very good. Proponents of independence, of course, are very aware of this specific scenario, in which they will be out of the European Union, who have to negotiate from outside of the European Union. And hence, they propose what is called the internal enlargement, the seamless transition, to use the idea of Article 48, which is the reform of the treaties, and negotiate from a position which is inside already the European Union and become a member without experiencing at any moment in time the situation of being outside of the European Union. Technically, it's feasible, although in my opinion it's highly complicated. It's feasible because the reform treaty could be entered into force at the same time in which the new territory assumes formal its independence. So basically, in a matter of hours, there will be a signing of the reform treaty, and the new state will become the part of the Union. It is technically feasible. It's highly difficult because there are all kinds of issues about recognition by international organizations, recognition by other states, and so on and so forth. That, in my opinion, will render this procedure highly complicated, although it's presented normally as a kind of very easy mechanism to achieve. But I would like to say afterwards a few things why this proposal is not sustainable. What is the preference for Article 48? It is obvious. In the way of those who are proposing this kind of internal enlargement, the costs associated with this process are much smaller. So suppose that if Scotland and Catalonia negotiate inside the European Union, the kind of cost that will be imposed on them will be much smaller. And that's the reason why the Scottish government, for instance, was saying that one of the things that will ask in negotiations will be A, to retain the opt-out on the euro, B, to retain the share, they call it the share of the British rebate, and C, to retain some of the opt-outs on areas like criminal. So they assume that if you are inside the European Union, you can really continue with this kind of specific status quo that the United Kingdom has got. Hence, costs will be smaller if you negotiate inside and you negotiate outside. And the question is whether it's possible really to have this kind of seamless transition that is presented by the Scottish government. I would like to underline first the practical difficulties before moving into a more normative case against this proposal. And the practical difficulties, to start with the most obvious, which seems to be absent in the thinking of particularly the Scottish government, is that in any internal reform negotiation, the party on the table will be the United Kingdom government, not the Scottish government. In other terms, the proxy for negotiation for the Scottish position in the European Union will be the United Kingdom government. And that means that and that applies of course also to the Catalans. It's exactly the same case, it won't be any different. And this means, which is very important, highly important, that any settlement of the position of Scotland within the European Union, Catalonia within the European Union, will depend on a previous agreement between what is left in the United Kingdom and the new independent Scotland. And of course, talking in terms as this could happen, we know after the referendum that for the next future it won't happen, but as I said, let me say this between brackets, I don't think that the use of independence has disappeared. The Quebec case tells us that it will return to the agenda. I'm sure that there will be another majority probably in time that will put forward this proposal. Hence, I think it makes sense to reflect. Even now, it seems to be a little bit out of place. The second practical difficulty, next to the fact that any independent territory will have to negotiate via the country that is just left, the second difficulty, which seems to be totally absent in the reasoning, is the opening up of the agenda. Whenever you start a process of reform of the European Union treaties, it is very difficult to constrain and to limit the agenda to those issues that are proposed by the main actors, the leading characters in this process. And just to announce some of the issues that may crowd the agenda once the process is triggered, let me speak about, or let me refer to the crucial mandate that is contained in the Treaty Stability, Cooperation and Governance, the Fiscal Compact, which mandates to merge with the European Union Treaty in a period of 5 years. So if there is a negotiation, if there is a reform, this issue will be on the agenda. And this is very important because, as you might remember, the United Kingdom did not sign this treaty. So you have the very tricky situation in which the reform to accommodate Scotland via the United Kingdom government will require, paradoxically, that the United Kingdom accepts the fiscal compact. So that creates a kind of nightmare scenario. Not to say anything about the demands of the European Parliament. The European Parliament has already announced it. This West Side EU has been created, has been constituted very few months ago, but already has announced the Committee of Constitutional Affairs that they want to include in the treaty new provisions for improving the democratization, the control of democracy on the macroeconomic and fiscal measures, the so-called six-pack and two-packs. And they want to do it via treaty revision, via treaty reform. So this is a second piece of work which is in the agenda. Then we can refer also to the will of the German government that disappeared in the coalition agreement between the two parties, to include in the treaty the contract agreement that had to be signed between countries which are in a fiscal surveillance position and the European Union to obtain certain funds. And of course, not to say the agenda of the Conservative government, to which I will refer in the next part of my presentation. So what I want to suggest here is that the agenda for opening up via Article 48, for including an independent territory, never can be limited to the agenda of this specific territory and equally. And this means that negotiations could be A, very long, and B, it's very difficult to predict whether they will be successful or not. And who is now familiar with this process knows that the outcome in the future could be highly unlikely, because A, unanimity, we have spoken in the morning about that, but also because something that Fernando was presenting in the morning, which is progressive intervention of referendum. So if you put a reform treaty to referendum in a certain country, say Denmark, you cannot predict the result, despite the fact that the main element of the reform treaty can be related to a Scottish accession to the Union or Catalan accession to the Union. So the result will be highly uncertain. There is no certainty that going to be Article 48 is opening up the agenda will take us to a better result. And then, of course, we have the use of unanimity and veto players that I already mentioned. So, in my opinion, the idea of a seamless transition was presented by the Scottish government, but it's also very much in the thinking of the Catalan government. It is really, in practical terms, difficult to achieve. So, it takes us to Article 49, which is the proper accession mechanism, and we know the costs that are associated with that. Why does it matter for the European Union? Because so far, what I said is very descriptive, made a very descriptive assessment of what are the costs of that. And there has been a huge debate on this in the last months. One of them was organized in Florence, but there are a couple of quite a few venues in which this debate has occurred. And there are a number of normative arguments that are suggesting that the European Union should recognize an independent Scotland immediately as part of the European Union. Recognize statehood within the European Union without really waiting for Scotland becoming independent and then recognizing it for itself. And the three arguments which I have presented here are very stylized in a very simple form, although some of them do not go very much of this simple form, I must say, are the following. The first normative argument is that the no deprivation of rights for European Union citizens, meaning Scottish citizens. And the argument goes saying there is no basis for the European Union denying to those who are already members of the community, those citizens that are already members of the community, denying the continuation of the rights just because democratically they decide to become independent from another state. This is probably the strongest normative argument that can be seen to justify this process of transition without experiencing sovereign statehood outside the European Union. But I will say something afterwards to question and criticize that. But again, I think is the strongest argument. The second normative argument refers to loyalty. And previously, this argument has been related to the preservation of the single market. And the argument says that the European Union should keep loyal to this part of a part of the territory of the Union to decide democratically again to take a decision which is separated for one country. Loyalty argument, I think, is very easy to criticize, and I will come back to this later. And finally, the third argument is the recognition of a democratic decision, meaning that, I said already before, that if the decision to become independent is taken democratically, and this is one of the values of the European Union has not a strong normative moral position to deny the effects of this democratic decision. Which, in my opinion, is not a very strong argument, because one of the, at least in the way I understand the democracy, one of the effects of democracy, you have to take responsibility for the cause and effects of the decision. You can decide by majority to become independent, but of course you cannot say that this decision is causeless. Right, so there is no kind of logical continuation from this. Now, what I would like to propose is a number of counter-arguments that suggest that the European Union should have a more clear and explicit policy on that. And the first, the strongest one that has been made, and it's an argument that has been made by a while, but I will share totally the argument, is that secession, in a way, is premised on the idea of creating units with a higher level of ethnic, cultural, national identity. And this in itself questions the very basic assumption behind the European project, which is living together under multinational, more multinational policies. And I think this is particularly clear, perhaps also clear in the Spanish case, but it's not clear, it's possible in the British case. Probably Britain, in my opinion, is one of the most multinational, multicultural, so to say, multicultural countries in Europe. And it's kind of surprising or shocking that the pull for independence comes precisely from this. In a way, it seems to me there is a little bit of a contradiction between the idea of living together in a multicultural, multinational polity and the idea of asserting national uniqueness, national separation. And it's something that, in my opinion, cannot be responded with contemplative attitude to this kind of question. positions. You may think only in this case, but the kind of reaction that the European Union can have in this specific project on the exports. We are here in Crete, and we can refer the normative arguments underlying this position to the specific case of Cyprus and the division of the island into different communities. I launched this idea perhaps for the sake of the discussion afterwards. The second normative counter-argument is the one about loyalty, which is normally referred to the provision in the treaties that require member states to be loyal. This has been demonstrated by the Scottish government to be loyal to a specific territory, but loyalty is due to the member states. Loyalty is not due to those who decide to break apart from a member state. There is no provision, no formal provision in the treaties. And I'm not taking this, let me be clear, as a legal principle. It's not that treaties say that you have to be loyal to member states. There is a strong normative base to keep your loyalty to those who sign for the obligation of loyalty. And I say that on the specific understanding that the current United Kingdom government, in my own understanding, is a very specific opinion, surprisingly and paradoxically, is not particularly loyal to what being a member of the European Union means. So there is a contradiction in my position in which I surmount that there is an obligation to become loyal, to remain loyal to a member state. There is no such obligation to a territory, despite the fact that the member state to which we are owed this loyalty principle is not probably the most loyal of all member states. The third point here is third normative argument is the externalization of decisions, which is in referendums both in Scotland and Catalonia. There is an effect of depriving of the rights of the Union, rights of European Union citizens, to those European Union citizens living in those countries. And this hasn't been contemplated. In theoretical terms, this is a very interesting debate that we could really elaborate on that. The inclusion of foreign residents in the census who vote for the referendum, and the same is going to happen in Catalonia, is an attempt to bypass this very ethnical national construction, but also raises very interesting questions about who is the demos in the longer term, because if you include non-nationals or non-residents from other countries in the decision to become independent, immediately you are creating a democratic demos to which you cannot exclude in future those people who already voted to create this independent demos. But that raises questions about how you can deprive of nationality those who are voting specifically. I don't know if you follow my reasoning, but there's an interesting theoretical question behind this. And final normative argument is that this mechanism will create a kind of privilege state in which certain countries will have costless. They could be in those countries, whereas the European Union will assume a very costly state. Take the case, for instance, of Kosovo, a case of remedial secession, which nevertheless has worked into life as a European Union. Because of the countries, my own country, more or less still object to the idea of this. Now, let me move very quickly. I have 3 minutes.
1 minute? Country 2 minutes ago, 3 minutes. So
1 minute to present.
1 minute left.
1 minute left, okay. To talk about withdrawal, which is a topic that really fascinates me more in theoretical terms rather than secession. What can we say about withdrawal in 1 minute? Very little. The case for withdrawal, as has been put forward by the United Kingdom Conservative Party and the United Kingdom Communist Party, is very repetitive in the sense that the arguments are already known and they are listed there. The only one which really has got some kind of strong empirical backing is the one referring to previous competence, and the British government has launched a review, the balance of competence review, which surprisingly has been, so far has produced a very shocking effect, is that the British government itself is concluding that the balance of competence between the United Kingdom and the European Union is about right. They have found it in one of the reports, they found in some cases in which something could be done. But in all the other reports released so far, the conclusion is the balance is okay. So the case comes to very little. But anyway, there is a procedure in Article 50 that allows to withdraw from the European Union, and this procedure is unilateral, unconditional, and non-immediate. And the question that may be interesting, and perhaps what we can discuss after my minute, which is already expired, is whether the United Kingdom really would follow the path of withdrawal. And in my opinion, it's highly unlikely. Highly unlikely exactly because there is a very low capacity of any British government to transfer the cost to the remaining member states. The cost of United Kingdom withdrawal from the EU. Of course, there will be costs both for United Kingdom and for the remainder of Europe, but I think the cost will be always larger, much larger for the withdrawal state from the remaining body. And in this context, what is important here is the gap. What I think the United Kingdom government wants to achieve is precisely activating the reform of the European Union, which allows to decrement or to reduce the power that have been already transferred to the European Union. So I think that's the gamble. The gamble, in my perception, hasn't got any option to be successful because of the same reasons I mentioned before in relation to the single section, particularly number 2, the opening up of the agenda, the intervention of veto players, and the requirement of unanimity. So if the United Kingdom wants to open up the agenda for increasing the powers, the agenda will be immediately crowded with other mechanisms, or with other demands, sorry, to reform the treaties. And that will create a very complicated scenario under unanimity. So the possibilities that the United Kingdom can achieve the evolution of competencies highly unlikely. The alternative procedure, or alternative view, alternative way that the British government pursue is probably seeking new opt-outs for the United Kingdom, which I think would be a likely now, and in the end, perhaps
I think we must end. We will have the chance. This is very. I mean, we could throw in the TTIP negotiation, all the implications. It's very interesting. Perhaps if we leave it there, would you like to very in one sentence to wrap it up? Brilliant. Excellent. Thank you so much. Now we are moving with the presentation of Professor Renwick. You have your PowerPoint?
Yeah. Okay.
Professor of Politics and International Relations at the University of Renwick.
Good, thank you. Thank you for having me here. Most of my research is on electoral reform and democratic reform and that kind of thing. But as we've already heard, there are some rather interesting things happening in the UK just at the moment. So what I'm going to present here is more focused on what's the UK up to? What are the various things happening in the UK and how do they relate to the themes of this conference? So this is going to be a kind of semi-scholarly look at what we've discovered in the UK over the last few weeks. So I'll talk about 3 things. I'll talk about the referendum on Scottish independence, which happened last Thursday. Then I'll talk a bit about what's happened since the referendum and the current debates in the UK about constitutional reform and where those might be going. And then I'll reflect a little bit as well on the issue of the UK's membership of the EU and what we've learned over the past week or so about the future of the UK within the EU. So, talking firstly about the Scottish referendum, there are, I guess, kind of 2 big headlines to mention about the Scottish referendum. The first is that things got a whole lot closer than most of us were expecting when the referendum was originally called. And secondly, nevertheless, Scots did vote against independence, and the no side of the campaign pulled ahead. It got a decent margin in the final vote, which was 55% against independence, 45% in favour of independence. In order to kind of explore a bit further just what happened in that vote, we can first look at evidence from 2 sources, from the vote itself and from opinion polls as to what are the correlates of a vote for yes in this referendum. So, the evidence from the vote itself comes from the fact that the results were reported in the 32 local authorities within Scotland. We don't have data for any level of aggregation below that, so we just have data from 32 local authorities of Scotland. And then we also have evidence from the commercial opinion polls. There is more detailed surveying taking place, but we don't have the results from that yet, so we just have to go on the commercial polls. And 2 things stand out in terms of the correlates of a yes vote there. The first is economic deprivation is clearly associated with a higher level of yes voting. So if you look at this graph, I should say, but I wasn't going to do any slides because I thought we were being informal. It was all going to be very nice. But then when I saw the lovely slides this morning, I thought, better do a few slides. So I've got a very few slides, but I just borrowed some other people's graphs in order to give you some slides. So this is, Steve Fisher was a political scientist, sociologist at Oxford, of course. But he was in the BBC all Thursday night analysing the results. And on Friday morning already he produced this graph and stuck it online, which is pretty impressive. And you probably can't really see it, but what it shows is for all the 32 local authority areas, it shows the size of the yes vote on the y-axis and the percentage unemployed on the x-axis. And you can see in the top right-hand corner are essentially the areas that voted yes. So Dundee, Glasgow, Western Berkshire, which is Clydebank, so one of the towns to the west of the Greater Glasgow area, and North Lanarkshire, which is again towns within the Greater Glasgow area, just east of Glasgow itself. Those were the 4 areas that voted yes, and there are also 4 of the 6 areas with the highest level of unemployment, and also highest in terms of various other indicators of deprivation. If you look also at the opinion polling evidence, then you see a very similar pattern that those with lower socioeconomic status are more likely to have voted for independence. So what you see there is very much the old industrial towns, essentially, that suffered a great deal from deindustrialization and parts of whose communities have never recovered from that process, are the areas that voted most strongly in favour of independence. And then the second effect is an effect of nationalism. So quite a few people commented as the results were coming in that areas that could return SNP, Special National Party MPs, in election after election were voting by very big margins against independence. And that's essentially because when the Conservative Party collapsed in Scotland in the 1980s, the people who traditionally were voting Conservative didn't have anywhere else to go to in terms of where they would vote, so they ended up voting for the SNP in large numbers. So large parts of Scotland that were traditionally Conservative voting ended up being SNP voting and have continued returning the same SNP MPs for many years, even though they don't support independence. But once you control, so this graph here looks at the SNP vote in Euro elections, this is from Steve Fisher again, related to the vote in the referendum once you control for economic hardship. So you're controlling for this weird thing that rich areas, some rich areas that used to be Tory vote SNP, and you can see that there is a positive effect of SNP vote upon a yes vote in the referendum. And similarly, if you look at the opinion polling evidence, then those who say they are primarily or exclusively Scottish, rather than being primarily or exclusively British or evenly matched between the two, those people who are primarily or exclusively Scottish are more likely to have voted yes, or said in the opinion polls they would have voted yes. So those are the kind of main correlates of a yes vote that come out from the analysis that it's been possible to do so far. Digging deeper into understanding why opinion changed in the course of the referendum, I think, is also very important. So when the referendum was called, and for much of the first year of the campaign, the yes side, the independent side, was way behind in the opinion polls. They were getting sort of a third, no more than that, support in the opinion polls. That, however, changed quite dramatically, and as many of you will be aware, by a week and a half before polling day, there was one opinion poll giving a majority for yes for the first time among the serious polls at any point during the campaign. I argued, starting way back last year, that if the yes side were going to win this referendum, then they would have to do so on the basis of one of so one of those mechanisms was what I called reversion point reversal. So the reversion point, as is common in the referendums literature, is what happens if people vote no in the referendum. So normally the reversion point is simply the status quo. And in referendums on the whole, voters are fairly conservative, fairly risk-averse, and tend towards the status quo. But if the side in the referendum arguing for change manages to convince people that actually the status quo is no longer available, and that actually by voting yes for this change, you're going to protect other aspects of the status quo that you care about, then it may be possible to get people to move in the direction of voting yes for change. So reversion point reversal is where a yes campaign manages to persuade people that voting yes for change in this referendum is the way to protect important aspects of the status quo. And then another mechanism that might have been expected a year or so ago to generate a shift in the direction of a yes vote would be the development of some kind of anti-establishment bandwagon. So if it seems to be the case that the Westminster elite in London was uniting against the Scots, saying that they weren't capable of ruling themselves, then it might well be that Scots would react against that and turn out in order to vote for independence. And what we can see from the fact that opinion did shift during the campaign, so this is John Curtis's poll of polls, the poll of all the opinion polls over time from October 2013 up to the day before the referendum itself. And you can see just how inexorably it got closer and closer and closer over time until the final poll of polls one day before the poll showed a slight swing back towards the status quo, and then of course the final vote. So that shows 52-48 against independence on the final day of the polls, and then the referendum itself was 55-45 against independence. So in essence, the Yes campaign did a very good job of persuading people on those two mechanisms that I mentioned. So they argued that it would be possible to protect important aspects of the status quo in Scotland through independence. Ironically, one of those was what Carlos was alluding to, that the SNP argued that there was a danger that if Scotland stayed within the UK, the English, those narrow-minded people, would vote to leave the EU, and therefore a vote for independence was a vote to protect Scotland's position within the EU. And more importantly, they also argued that the Scottish social model, the more statist vision of politics that many people in Scotland think is associated with Scottish political culture, would be protected from all those evil people in England who want to cut the state as far as possible. So those arguments worked very effectively, and also a clear anti-Westminster, anti-establishment bandwagon worked during the campaign as well. The Yes campaign was very good at exploiting those things. The No campaign did a very poor job. They understood that a referendum is normally won by the No side by raising fear about the consequences of change, but they failed to understand that in this context, where people were really engaged very deeply with the issues, and where nationalism was an element in the vote, people wanted to believe that yes, we can govern ourselves, yes, we can make a success of this, and we don't want to give in to fear. So those sorts of dynamics seem, so far as we can tell from the evidence that we have, to have led to this narrowing of the race over time. Nevertheless, at the end of the day, the fear thing seems to have been important, and we do see that final switch in the direction of the status quo right at the end of the campaign and in the final results. So that's what I'll say on the Scottish referendum. What's happened since the Scottish referendum is very interesting, particularly if, like me, you get excited about constitutional reform. So the two headlines here are, just because there was a no vote, as Carlos was suggesting, that doesn't mean that Scottish independence is off the agenda by any means at all. structure of the UK is likely to change. And a large part of that is because of what was promised in the final stages of the campaign, when the no side started to get frightened about what was going to happen and the prospect that it might lose. It suddenly promised major further devolution to Scotland, and it made the three main party leaders made a very, very, very strong commitment that they would do this, and they would do this before the next election. If they failed to deliver on that promise, then it seems to me almost inevitable that Scotland will leave the UK. So it seems that the intensity to which Scots, remember the referendum had 85% turnout, which is the highest referendum in any vote in the UK since mass enfranchisement. So the level of intensity of interest in this is enormous. And enormous numbers of people in Scotland are following it very, very carefully. Will the politicians deliver on the things that were promised to them in the course of the referendum campaign? There's enormous scepticism towards those politicians. Large numbers of people who voted no seem to have done so feeling a bit bad about it and feeling ready to be disappointed if the politicians fail to deliver on the promises. So if further devolution to Scotland is not achieved very quickly, then many people will think that they were duped. The SNP will be able to win the next Scottish Parliament elections in 2016. They will have a very strong mandate to hold another referendum, and they will be able to argue in that referendum, we now know that you can't trust the Westminster Lead, we have to go to them. Even if they do deliver on that promise, the degree to which the nationalist movement has mobilised, the SNP has strengthened, means that, again, it seems to me that the issue isn't going to go away. And then for the rest of the UK, the debate since the referendum has emphasised that MPs, particularly in England, wanted to have greater powers for England. MPs from Wales, politicians in Wales are also talking a great deal about this. It seems likely that there will be a move to some kind of quasi-federal structure, whether it's formally federal within a written constitution, I doubt, because we don't do things that way, but some kind of, in effect, federal structure seems fairly inevitable. And the shape of that will make a big difference to how it works, and whether the UK can survive or not. And just moving finally, and that's rather quickly, to the issue of EU membership and the future of the UK's EU membership. So the general patterns here are, firstly, that as in Scotland, there's higher support for EU exit among those with lower socioeconomic status, also among older voters, which isn't a feature shared with Scottish independence support. Rob Ford and Matthew Goodin have argued in their argued in their book on UKIP, the UK Independence Party, that supporters of that party are the left behind. They are less educated, less well-off voters away from the metropolitan centres who feel left behind, essentially. And these are similar to the voters who vote, who favour exit from the EU. We should not, however, so UKIP, of course, won the European Parliament elections in the UK in May. But I think we shouldn't exaggerate the strength of feeling for leaving the EU. So one point is that for most UKIP voters, EU membership is not the most important issue. Although the party is focused on Europe, that is not the case for its voters. And if you look at the opinion poll evidence, then actually there's been a swing against leaving the EU in the UK over the last 12 months or so. So the vast majority of polls over the last 12 months show the majority in favour of staying within the EU. And if you ask the question of how would you vote in a referendum following a renegotiation of membership, then it's about 2/3 in favour of staying within the EU, 1/3 against. Whether that's meaningful, of course, is dubious. It may just be that voters haven't thought about it terribly much, and therefore they go for the middle option of, yeah, not in as it is now, not out, but some nice, lovely reformed version. So whether that would really work if we actually get a vote, who knows? But the polling evidence doesn't suggest that it's obvious that the UK will leave the EU. Though I've been talking mainly about what happened last week, we also have to be aware of what happens in 2 weeks' time, when there will be a by-election in Clacton, one of the constituencies in eastern England. So one of the Conservative MPs, Douglas Carswell, who's the MP for that constituency, resigned from the Conservative Party, defected from UKIP, resigned from his seat in Parliament in order to contest it again. He's always certain to win that seat. So that UKIP will for the first time win a seat in the House of Commons, and he's very likely, I would think, to win it in general election in May as well. That's a bit of a game changer. It has been the case that the UKIP just couldn't make people believe that they could actually win a UK Parliament constituency. Getting over that perceptual hurdle will make it much easier for them to win additional seats in the House of Commons next year. So it seems much more likely now than it did a month ago that Nigel Farage, the leader of UKIP, will win a seat in the House of Commons at the next general election. So interesting things are happening with EU membership. In terms of what we learned from the referendum about that, so clearly we saw from the referendum that economic risks and concerns about economic risks are very important in shaping how people vote. We also saw in the Scottish referendum a desire not to be frightened. But it would seem that that desire was linked to nationalism, and the idea that we don't want to be frightened. We don't want to be frightened by an external elite in Westminster. Whereas you wouldn't get quite that dynamic going in a referendum on EU membership. And of course, fundamentally, what happens in the referendum depends on the starting point in terms of does the UK government manage to renegotiate something that UK voters find plausible. As I said, UK voters are not on the whole terribly excited about the EU as an issue in itself. So just renegotiating on what's the distribution of powers between the UK and the EU isn't actually the most important thing. The issue that UKIP voters and other voters very widely are concerned about is immigration. And therefore it seems likely that the UK government will want to have some kind of deal that restricts the freedom of movement of labour, at least for those people who are perceived as benefit tourists, to use the language that is common in the British discourse. I should stop, shouldn't I? So, a few other interesting lessons about the impact of the Scottish vote on the outcome could also be drawn, but I won't go into this now.
Thank you very much. And the last presentation of this panel, will be delivered by Professor Vera Troeger from the University of Warwick.
Thank you very much. I'm very delighted to be here. Thank you for the invitation to create a forum that you have organized. And yeah, I was very impressed so far by the discussion, and I hope I can contribute a little bit to it as well. So let me start from the title of the session, which is from Brexit to Brexit. And I actually want to argue that it's probably rather a little bit Brexit versus Brexit, because this means two very different things. So when we actually refer to Brexit, we usually mean the Greek exit from the European Monetary Union, and we talk about Brexit, we rather talk about the British exit from the EU, the potential British exit from the EU. And I think we have to distinguish a little bit between the monetary union and political union. And here the really big question is, can we have an economic union without a political union, and vice versa? And what I want to do is I want to focus just a little bit, and I hope I'm not taking too much time so we can actually have a discussion afterwards, on actually the British and the Greek position towards the European Monetary Union, the UK as a representative of EU members that stayed outside the monetary union, and Greece as a representative of the southern countries that are within the European Union and the European Monetary Union. So when we talk about monetary unions, there's of course a huge literature that talks about optimal currency areas and what are the benefits and the cost of being in a currency union. And what the major arguments out there usually are is that within being a member of a currency union, of course, gives you a stable currency and monetary policy, which increases trade, investment, and allows you to borrow more cheaply. Versus the other side, and that's of course always what the British government argued, is that if you're outside the monetary union and have your own currency, your own central bank, that gives you monetary policy autonomy, and especially in times of crisis, you can use monetary policy to counterbalance the negative effects of an economic or financial crisis. And also the British always argued very strongly that the pound, the British pound as a currency, is kind of identity, is a burden for British identity, and that especially British citizens, so including the Scots and the people in Northern Ireland, need to see the counterfeit of their queen on the British pound, right? On the other hand, of course, necessary conditions for working currency union are institutional conditions, especially that countries that join into the currency union have similar economic, especially fiscal, and also labor market institutions, and relatively congruent economic business cycles. So let me focus first on Britain as an EU member but outside of the European Monetary Union. And as I said, the British government always argued mainly two things. One thing, the pound is important for identity, and also that the British government and the central bank want to retain monetary policy autonomy. Just showing you something funny, of course, that's a Scottish £5 note, and clearly the Scots are not so keen on the Queen on that pound note, so much for identity.
She's on the other side.
Thank you. You took away my joke. So, yeah, I know, but in terms of that, right, it's, and when you see Northern Irish pounds, it's also you don't have necessarily the Queen on them. So over time, you know that, especially before the crisis, the euro, once the European Monetary Union was established, actually caught up to the US dollar as a reserve currency, and so it was very much accepted as a strong reserve currency that allows for stable trade, stable exchange rate, and so on. So these are just the stages of the currency union over time, and what we argue is, in terms of retaining monetary policy autonomy for outsider countries, is that especially those countries that are members of the European Union but not members of the Monetary Union, Denmark, Sweden, and the UK, they have a vested interest in having stable exchange rate with the Monetary Union, or with countries within the Monetary Union, because of the amount of trade they have with the European market. And so what we see actually empirically, and that's work from Thomas Kemper and myself, is that once the Monetary Union was established, outside our countries, especially Sweden, Denmark, and the UK, followed more and more strongly the monetary policy within the Union. And so this argument about monetary policy autonomy doesn't hold so much, especially not in times of crisis. So when we look more recently at the crisis, and we also see that especially the Bank of England followed kind of the same monetary policy as the European Central Bank, but we can of course argue that the economic crisis hit both regions equally strong in an equal time frame and so on, and so it's basically more like co-movement than that the central bank in Britain actually looks at the European Central Bank. So what really we need to see that we have an economic crisis that is differential for countries that are outside the monetary union and that are inside the monetary union, to see whether this fear of floating, this we follow the monetary policy particular to specific countries. And this is a question that we really haven't seen yet, but my answer to this would probably a little bit of both, right? Of course, it's important to keep stable exchange rate with the monetary union, and but in terms of really strong crises where you have different institutions and different business cycles, it's probably ideal to have your own monetary policy and your own currency. And that actually leads me to the Greek case, and I'm borrowing a little bit arguments from my friends and colleagues, Aris and David Soskis, and basically they start off with the arguments of an optimal currency area, and institutionally speaking, the European monetary or the Eurozone is not really an optimal currency area. And that's the main problem here, that we have deep structural institutional imbalances between the northern countries that joined the European Monetary Union and the southern countries, including Greece. And the problem, of course, was that the monetary union was built around this northern European model of capitalism, and this is kind of not really compatible with the institutions in the south of Europe. And of course, this was known at the birth, right? This was known at the birth that this might lead to very difficult imbalances within the European Monetary Union. But as we know, most politicians are at least, if not just short-sighted, then at least only medium-sighted. And in the medium run, this was supposed to work, and it did work for a very long time, right? But now we have seen what happens, and so when you have very difficult structural and institutional imbalances within the same monetary union, and now we have two possible outs from this: A, reforms in the southern states, which are blocked by insiders in the south, and I will come back to this in a second, or major debt restructuring, and this is blocked by voters in the north, especially in Germany, as we know. But it is argued that a Greek exit and a wider break of the monetary union is too costly for all members, and this kind of creates a curse of a large bargaining space. And so at the moment, what we have is a war of attrition and austerity for most countries in the monetary union. So just very shortly to summarize the main features of the northern export model of capitalism. As we know, we have an export sector-led growth based on coordinated wage bargaining and a strong, conservative, non-accommodating central bank. And this is combined with effective training institutions, and that's quite important because that leads to wage restraint in these countries. And so the result of this is that we have relatively high competitiveness and demand for skilled workers, and this is actually accommodated through effective training systems, especially in countries like Germany and the northern countries. And this is basically underwritten by a compromise between employer skilled unions and at least some parts of the lower skilled labor, because they benefit from the state-sponsored training programs. So basically the correlates here are high competitiveness and relatively high domestic price levels. On the other side, the southern system, we have a very strong division between the formal sector with very strong but relatively uncoordinated unions. And then we have a large informal sector with weak unions that is usually excluded from the bargaining, right? And before the Eurozone was founded, the macroeconomic policies were mildly inflationary, and then we had occasional devaluations, which of course cannot happen within a monetary union. So that actually, since, as you know, in Spain, Italy, and also in Greece, the vocational training systems are a little bit less developed, this generated kind of an intersectoral inequality and a relatively low demand for high-skilled labor. So the problem here is really the insider policies and the insider bargaining that excludes the informal sector, as well as partially at least export interests. So we have relatively low competitiveness and clusters of northern and southern members of the European Monetary Union in terms of price level and trade competitiveness.
Sorry, can you explain this again? Can you
What?
explain that point again?
Why we have this? Because we have different kind of labor market institutions and a different kind of bargaining, wage bargaining systems in the northern and southern countries. That's why we have different levels of competitiveness and price levels. Because, I mean, so what you should expect is, of course, low price levels and high competitiveness. But since we have this...
I don't know what competitiveness means.
I showed this to you. Basically, what I mean by this is trade surplus and export competitiveness, basically. Right?
Is America competitive?
Not in this, because it has, like America is very different. It has a very large domestic market, right? So and it's not part of the monetary union either. It has it's a very completely different system. It has a large domestic market. It has very different labor market institutions, and it has a very large trade deficit, right? So it doesn't fit in this kind of northern European labor market institutions that create different outcomes. So anyway, so just let me kind of draw the conclusions from this. So what we see from this, and with respect to the common currency with these two different labor market systems, is that, of course, what happened is that the northern countries, especially Germany, gained from this. They had a lot of growth because they had fixed exchange rate and real depreciation of exports to the southern countries and new investment opportunities, because there was no, at least the illusion was there that there was no devaluation risk, right, because of the common currency. And also in the short term, southern countries benefited from this because of the large inflow of capital and a large investment and also a lot of consumption. But so what we see is this trade divergence because of this, so a lot of surplus, export surplus, trade surplus, more exports than imports in the northern countries, and trade deficit in the southern countries. And that increased, as you can see, since the establishment of the monetary union. And so what we see here is the long-term interest rate spread, which was relatively large before the monetary union was established between the southern and the northern European countries. And then, of course, artificially was reduced because the common currency gave the illusion of stability and stable monetary policy. And then when the crisis hit, of course, all of a sudden investors realized that it was much more risky to invest in southern countries, and there was a real risk of exit and devaluation. So this just shows the relationship that I just have shown before between trade deficit and the long-term interest rate in 2011, when the crisis was really hitting the southern countries. So the question of what are the solutions to this, what are the scenarios that we can expect? I mean, of course, there is the possibility of a breakup of the eurozone. So this is, in the long run, of course, viable. But it has very huge short and medium-term costs of adjustment, especially because of capital flight, devaluation in the southern countries. And so it has also high political costs. And so it seems always feasible, at least politically, to avoid an quick exit from the monetary union. The second solution is, of course, institutional reforms in the south, especially institutional reforms of the labor market, flexibilization of the labor market, and breaking down of insider protection. Of course, this is a very politically almost impossible to introduce in the southern countries, as we have seen also with the election results during the last election similar to the MPs. And also it is blocked as long as we can rule out a breakup if that doesn't seem politically feasible. And so this would be at least sustainable in the medium term, but is of course blocked by especially German voters. If neither of this happens, we probably will see a long period of kind of Japanese-style austerity, especially for the southern countries. So this is in terms of what's the bargaining space here. So in the middle, that's where we probably are at the moment and for a while, is the austerity. And then, of course, big reforms are blocked by insiders, and nobody wants the breakup. And large northern transfers are blocked by voters, especially in Germany. So actually, the positive outcome space is actually very small, right? If you can combine the major debt restructuring and reforms in the southern countries. And so the long-term pessimistic scenario is, of course, that we have continued austerity, but this is very strongly fought against by especially France, has a very strong position in the European Monetary Union. And so it seems like there will be a kind of an ultimatum against, or for Germany, either the total breakup or a much more accommodating policies, so rising debt levels and ECB engaging in large-scale quantitative easing, as they have kind of done already. And then what we see now is that France actually is blowing the deficit ceiling, and we just saw with the inaugural visit of Manuel Valls in Germany that he actually arrived with a catalogue of demands for the German Chancellor and said, look, we are breaking the debt ceiling, but we are not sorry for it because that's the only thing we can do right now in order to fight the crisis. And so if this really happens on a large scale, then I'm not so sure what happens in Germany, and there might even be further breakup. That's all. Thank you.
Okay, now I'd like to open the floor for questions and short comments from the floor. Fernando first.
Very quickly, a question to all three. Well, I'll try. All three. First, Carlos. Have you looked at federal systems? I've got my bias, as you all know. But I know Carlos has been an avid reader of William Riker, and federal systems actually have got our face with the same challenge. That is to say, the constituent units in federal systems do not want splits, just like member states don't want to split up. So in federal systems, I'm thinking principally here about Switzerland and how it had to deal with the Judah problem. The way it dealt with it was essentially the formal route that you sort of mentioned. It went through the ordinary channels of constitutional change, which required a referendum across the whole polity to accept, of course, a new member state. So federal systems could be insightful to see, have you got any opinion on that? To Alan, on the what have we learned from the Scottish referendum, I might have a slightly different picture here with regard to the possible 2017 referendum. I don't think it would necessarily be so clear-cut. And think about a referendum in which you've got Farage, pretty much like Sam, charismatic leader using the emotional argument, etc. And what are the British? What's the emotional kind of anchor that you can use to sort of neutralize the exit argument? It's very hard. In the case of the Scottish No, of course, there's a long 300-year history, etc. But in the case of a potential continued membership referendum, it's going to be very difficult. I think people are quite scared of this. And then the third point was on here's a presentation. So this export, I like that figure you had with the export trade thing, but I think in your graph you're treating the Eurozone not as a unit. So I wonder how much the trade surplus of those countries is actually non-EU member states, that is to say Germany, Holland, Austria. I mean, essentially their trade surplus is a lot with southern European countries. That is to say, the reform model, that is, if only the South would reform, does not translate necessarily into export-led growth along your Lysosskis models of capitalism. So that, in a nutshell, is a bit the problem. Is there a danger here that there's a bit of a false dichotomy between reform? Because reform is still not going to get you. Cyprus is not going to turn into Germany and suddenly start producing Volkswagen Golfs or BMWs that everyone wants. It re-export things, yeah. And incidentally, Cyprus is a good example.
Shall we keep it a little short, so we have a little bit.
So there are 3 points for that.
Brilliant. And what is suggested to take 3 questions from Professor Zenios?
Yes, my question is for Vera, it's very much in the same line like Carlos. Because there is nothing I disagree with your talk, and I like it. But I disagree with the overall approach. I think by putting too much emphasis on Greece, we're doing ourselves a disservice. So the question is the following. In this model of North-South and competitiveness and reform, where to solve the problem? And I'm not saying we do not need to do some of this, but if this was the way to solve the problem, then where would the Irish crisis fit in this model? And how would you answer the question when there was reference to the US model? Well, New York labor efficiency and Montana labor efficiency are way apart, and the country is still functioning. So I agree with everything in this analysis, but the overall thing that that's our problem, is competitiveness and reform. I think it's missing some serious issues.
It's very interesting. In fact, this leads nicely to the presentation in the morning, because this is formed the basis or the focus of our first meeting here at Chania 2 years ago. So we'll have the opportunity, of course, to revisit that, as it were. Professor Georgopoulos.
Thank you. Just to follow up on Dr. Zenios' remark, I found the third paper extremely interesting and provocative. But it seems to me that there is a sort of a competitiveness fallacy lurking from the background. I mean, it somehow assumes that the only way in which the Eurozone is viable is if every single Eurozone economy has an external surplus, which is not logical, and it would be internationally, globally destabilizing. Having said that, there is a clear problem if the mechanism of adjustment in the Eurozone is, in terms of competitiveness adjustment, is mainly deflation, is internal devaluation. This is something that is extremely painful socially. It ends up with a certain regressiveness in terms of the social impact that it has, hurting especially the lower wages. It is politically, it's a question for political sustainability, and it is also the kind of beggar thy neighbor devaluation that we have seen pre-Euro. Only this time it is a beggar thy neighbor devaluation via wage policy, via wage oppression, rather than by devaluation. Having said that again, I think the interesting case at question here is not Greece, which is adjusting rapidly, but it is Italy or France. France is a relatively balanced economy, which has been receiving a rather lot of heat as a result not of not being competitive, but of not being as competitive as Germany. The hourly competitiveness of France is better than that of Germany, even better than that of the United States. The problem is that they work less hours. They have to adjust that. But France, other than that, has been an economy with a relatively stable external account. It's is that the only way towards converging is through following the kind of extremely aggressive unit labor cost reductions that we have seen in the first decade of the euro. It seems to me that what this crisis has shown us is, first of all, the limits of political viability of wage deflation. We are governments that are testing their extreme limits of endurance. I'm not even talking about the Troeger program countries, I'm talking about Italy, I'm talking about, to a certain extent, France, and these latter two have not even started their reforms. But it is, what this crisis has taught us is that we need a greater rebalancing, a more symmetric adjustment, meaning that at the time that the South does its homework, the periphery does its homework in terms of structural reforms and gaining competitiveness, the North has also to deliver in terms of sharing some of the burden of that adjustment. And in that direction, I think it's very welcome that we are seeing wage reductions in Germany. And of course, we should be seeing more of reflationary policies.
Wage increases.
Wage increases, I mean, over the last couple of years, wage increases. And we should be seeing more of reflationary policies in general of the Eurozone average by the ECB and especially in the core countries of the North. But the suggestion that you seem to propose that a breakup is a solution, I think is a highly overrated conclusion. A breakup would lead us back to the pre-Euro period. I remind you that the pre-Euro period was a very unstable equilibrium through which economies were trying to gain competitiveness through devaluations, better than neighbors devaluations. This is totally undermining the functioning and the value of the single market. And I would even question how viable it would be within a single market for full capital mobility. Because savers, capital holders in peripheral economies would simply tend to flee these economies in conditions of capital mobility if the main instrument of adjustment is currency devaluation. So you would end up having no real single market. Would Germany be better off with that? I doubt it very much. Now again, the main problem in the Eurozone, I close with that. So the main problem in the Eurozone, I think the most alarming perhaps trend is a sense that is emerging in the German economy, German society, that its welfare, its export-led growth is somehow decoupling from the rest of the Eurozone. There's a sense of complacency that we do not need any more demand consumption in the Eurozone because we have Chinese demand that is absorbing our exports. This would be translated into political dynamics that would be extremely dangerous, and I agree with what I have diagnosed as a certain degree of pessimism there in your presentation. I have a couple of things more on the models. Can I say no?
Yeah,
I'll come back.
What I suggest is this is the first round of questions. Then we have Professor Georgopoulos, Professor Renwick, and Nikitas, if I got the count right. But if a first sort of response from the presenters, if you'd like to. Some of the questions, of course, if you don't want to counter-comment the comments.
I have a question for Fernando, so whether which is about the relevance of federal models. I didn't know about the two resolutions, so my knowledge is more of the American federal experience and the writing of authors like Harpoon, that Troeger also acquainted, and the way that the American principle of secession is nothing to be learned from. Theoretical solutions were close immediately, both via doctrinal and also practical mechanisms. Initially, were the unification of federal legislation by the state legislatures, or also the possibility of having common majorities, and that will create the basis for keeping together those states that feel somehow threatened by the union. That was close immediately in the first 30-40 years of the union via establishing the supremacy of the Supreme Court over state Supreme Courts, and via declaring totally illegal the unification principle, which just, by the way, very surprisingly was in the early writings of Jefferson. Jefferson was one supporting the confederal. So, what you can learn from federal experience is not really coincident. You have one case, perhaps the Switzerland case, in which you could accommodate this mechanism via internal mechanism, but also the American experience shows that's not the case. And it's a wonderful book by Murray Forsyth, or you know, from 82, So you can find subscriptions there, but also you can find conversations that indicate that the issues are not very good at dealing with these problems of secession.
Thank you, Fernando. Obviously, when we are trying to work out what might happen in the context of a highly salient referendum, then it gets very speculative. This is a very different context from the current context. So, I mean, I think what it's academically defensible to say is that the mechanisms that you suggest are plausible mechanisms, but equally there are plausible counter-arguments to them. So, you suggested that Nigel Farage as a charismatic politician might be able to carry a lot of support. Yes, equally he provokes a lot of strong negative reactions as well as strong positive reactions in a large part of the electorate. So how much of the electorate he would be able to carry with him isn't entirely clear. An interesting question is the question of how, who's on what side in a referendum. So if David Cameron manages to negotiate a deal that he is willing to back, how much of the Conservative Party can he carry with him? And I think that is a very important issue for shaping the outcome of any referendum. And then on the point about what's the emotional anchor for staying within the European Union. I think if we look at, so again, what you said plausible, but the alternative is if we look at the Scottish referendum, Britishness was not an important part in the campaign at all. So for a small number of Scots, being British was an important reason for voting no. But for the swing voters, Britishness was not something that was mentioned. Indeed, the no campaign was terribly embarrassed when the Orange Order went out onto the streets of Edinburgh a few days before the vote, proclaiming how wonderful it is to be British. And the no campaign absolutely stayed away and tried to give it no publicity. So Britishness wasn't something that mattered in that referendum. Similarly, the absence of any feeling of Europeanness, clearly there is such an absence, I'm not sure that would be terribly important. I think the emotional argument would be similar to the emotional argument in Scotland, that we've been doing things together, though we're separate nations, for quite a long time. It's good to be open to the world. It's not good to close yourself to the world. Of course, the side of the argument calling for exit from the EU has picked up on that and precisely argues that the EU is a tiny little bit of the world and is terribly protectionist and closed-minded, and we want to be of the whole world. But I think these emotional arguments can go both ways.
I have to say I'm very happy that, so all these arguments of course are very short-handed given the time we have, right? And it's much more complex, and I'm happy that this sparked so much reaction, and I think that actually has huge interest in these kind of topics because it's so difficult to come to a solution. So what I actually did not suggest is that, there was nothing normative about this, right? So what I did not suggest is that actually the northern kind of export-led model is what we need to have in our countries. The problem is really that we have this imbalance between the exporting countries, especially Germany, and the importing countries, especially the southern countries in the European Monetary Union. And we need something that is more of has a more balanced trade, right? Because what we have seen since the establishment of the Monetary Union is this huge increase in the trade differential between these two parts of the Monetary Union. So I mean, clearly, and we have seen this, there needs to be reforms of the labor markets in the southern countries, but this is not the only solution. That is probably one step in the right direction. And of course, the northern countries have to solve the problem as well. And I said, so this combination of a Marshall Plan, right, and reforms in the south is probably the way to go. The problem is that this is blocked from both sides, right? And I think the comparison with the US is a little bit difficult because that's what was said all along, that it's very difficult to have a monetary union with without a fiscal union, and we know that in the US we have a fiscal union, right? And that's why, of course, these trade imbalances don't lead so much to a high sovereign debt in some states in the US and a high surplus in other states. So I think that is a lesson to learn from the states, that in a federal system you don't have just a monetary union but also a fiscal union. I can say much more, but we are running over time. Maybe we have more discussion over coffee afterwards.
Yes.
Can I have a quick question for Alan?
Yes, of course. Let me
go round.
Let's regroup.
Yeah.
We have planned, knowing that there is the possibility of slipping over a little bit, particularly with the interviews. We have a buffer zone of the coffee break. I'm sure you all like your coffee, but you wouldn't mind if we drink it a bit faster than normal. Perhaps gain from a rich extension of the rich discussion. So on that basis, what I would like is to open the floor for very short comments / questions, and perhaps have then, if need be, response from the panel. The order is Professor Chaklo first.
The question is to Professor Renwick. Basically, you mentioned that it will be a very difficult period for the UK if the politicians will not deliver on their promises in the immediate future. Many commentators seem to suggest that it would be extremely difficult to fulfill these promises. Something I cannot understand is how these promises can be delivered without going into a federation in the United Kingdom. Just to give you an example, how would it be possible that health issues, for example, would be voted in the Scottish Parliament, whereas issues concerning health for the remaining of the United Kingdom would be decided at Westminster, where Scottish MPs will have a vote there as well. And this for several other aspects of government evolution. And this is something that you did not refer at all in your talk. So the question is, would it be possible to deliver on their promises without going into a federal UK?
Professor Aris.
Question to Alan. First to, it's again about political implementability of serious devolution. So how do you assess the probabilities that it could be done successfully? And the second point is on the discussions of the euro crisis. I think I would agree that kind of more deflation, we have reached the limits of wage deflation in the crisis countries, but we certainly haven't reached the limits of necessary deregulation, unless we are in a country like Italy, for instance, which just remains. And the question is to you economists, and to Vera. So what do you think are the chances of the proposal of Gerazzi and Tabellini to increase, to cut taxes in all European member states for a couple of years to an important degree, and being funded and bought by the ECB? Would that be an alternative way out of the recession and deflation zone in which we are right now?
Just a very quick comment and then question. A comment for Stavros Xenios, whether Ireland actually belongs to the same category like the southern countries. I would say from a market perspective that Ireland doesn't actually belong to the southern countries, and you can see that both from the stock market and the spreads in the bonds. Yes, there was a banking crisis, but that's the only similarity, and that's why already Ireland seems that it is running with an 8% growth rate, and it has a V-shaped recovery instead of a U-shape or no-shape or no growth at all. And my question to Vera is, if the solution, one of the solutions, is an exit from EMU, then will all the members of the EMU will have an incentive to be the first member to exit the EMU in order to minimize
any other case any other salient case of secessionism. And the big difference that I found that this was more civic, less ethnic. It wasn't really about being ethnically different. That wasn't the point. The point is we're politically different. We don't really, we're more pro-redistribution. We don't get the representation and the policy outcomes that we would otherwise get on our own, precisely because we're different, we're small, and instead of getting, we don't have fees in contrast to what is happening in England, and all this was more kind of a political argument, and for the first time I think that even the mobilization that was generated by the campaign for the Yes campaign, a new component was introduced, and I don't know what extent I think that was also salient in making the whole age-related difference, which is something that we didn't show for the moment, but we know also that young people voted more for yes than old people. The idea of using our knowledge, our 21st century knowledge to construct something pretty much from scratch, rather than being constrained from the fact that we have embedded institutions of the Westminster model, which of course we like the knowledge that we now have 7 or 8 centuries later. And these are issues that made, I think, the whole debate about the yes and no referendum more different, at least with respect to the classic cases of Catalonia, Quebec, even Belgium. It was more kind of political, more civic than ethnic.
And last but not least, okay.
Yeah. So I have a question for Vera again on this. So I'm a bit confused about, you spoke about fiscal issues and trade issues, and I'm not sure I see the connection between trade imbalances and fiscal issues, and then the productivity, which I guess what you call competitiveness is somehow related to productivity. And I guess my corollary, my sub-question is, how do you think that convergence of income will happen in the European Union without imbalances? Basically, my claim is, to give it away, there can be no convergence without trade deficits in some countries. Without trade deficits. That's my claim.
Anything to this? Nikita?
Thank you. I guess I received a lot of comments on this talk, and one more. Your point on the reversion point of the referendum, I thought it was very interesting. And I also feel that the reversion is not back to the original status quo. I mean, there's a danger, there's a precedent that has been set here, both in terms of future referendums on the Scottish case, right? So this idea of a never-endum, as in Quebec, but also in terms of Catalonia and other cases. So I think that's something that we should point out. I'd like to make a bit of a more general comment in terms of sort of framing this panel and also linking the topic of this panel to the previous one. And it has to do with kind of the ways through which the crisis, both the political and economic crisis, has reverberated into the domestic political system. And from what I hear, there are sort of 2 or 3 ways that this has happened. One, through ideological polarization, right, along the traditional left-right dimension. And this is exactly what has happened in Greece. And to some extent, some parties have tried to overcome this by overcoming this sort of traditional left-right dimension, by depoliticizing their rhetoric, right, by kind of overcoming this more traditional type of rhetorical sort of symbols. And that's kind of the argument that we reanimate. Another way through which a crisis has reverberated is through secessionist tendencies, right? Through sort of territorial disputes. So on one hand, we have ideological disputes, and on the other hand, we have territorial disputes. So the question here, or I guess it's for something that we can talk about over coffee. What explains? I mean, I suppose that the political system of each country would explain why the crisis has sort of unfolded in different ways in different countries. But the question is there a common remedy for these sort of the crisis of the domestic political systems in Europe? Is there a way to sort of deal with all these different sort of problems, once kind of all at once?
Right.
Would like to begin? I will have questions, I think, and of course Vera as well.
feasibility of taking devolution further. So there's already a lot of devolution to Scotland. It is already the case that health policy in Scotland is entirely decided by the Scottish Parliament. They have to fit within the amount of money that they get from Westminster, but that's a block grant that they can use as they wish. So they have a great deal of freedom. I mean, there's the constraint of history, what they've inherited, of course, but in terms of what they can change, that they have a great deal of freedom. And indeed, there's already further devolution happening. So the Scotland Act of 2012 is a huge further devolution of power to Scotland that comes into effect in 2016. And that devolves a lot more fiscal power in particular, and some other responsibilities as well, but a lot more power to determine taxes than at present. So what's being proposed in terms of yet more devolution to Scotland is really a bit more of the same. It's not different in kind from what there already is. So I don't think there's an issue with the feasibility of the implementation of the Scottish bit of all of this stuff. And what has been promised as happening very, very quickly, what was promised before the referendum is simply the devolution to Scotland, not anything else. The problem comes that as you have more devolution to Scotland with the Scotland Act of 2012 and the extra stuff that's coming, then it becomes harder and harder to maintain the current structure for the rest of the UK. And that's what the discourse in England has been over the past week. So a lot of English, particularly Conservative MPs, have argued that the solution to this is to have what they call English votes for English laws. So only English MPs in the House of Commons would vote on matters that relate only to England. And a lot of them present this as a fairly technical change just to who is able to cast a vote in lobbies of the House of Commons, and you solve a constitutional anomaly and everything's fine. The reality, of course, is that it is way more complicated than that. It's quite plausible that at the next election, next May, the Conservatives will win most seats in England and Labour will win most seats across the UK as a whole. What do you do if you only have English MPs voting on English matters? Some people have accepted that, in effect, by creating English votes for English laws, you're creating a separate English Parliament within the building of the current Parliament, UK Parliament, and that only works with the parliamentary system if you have a separate English executive as well. But of course, setting that up is far from straightforward. It's also not clear in this what happens to Wales and Northern Ireland. It's not just that there are things that affect England and there are things that affect the whole of the UK. There are some things that affect England only, some that affect England and Wales only, some that affect England, Wales and Northern Ireland. So once you try to work out how you deal with that, then that again gets very, very complicated. So most of the constitutional experts, so-called, in the UK have been saying over the past week that you can't do the UK-wide bit of this constitutional revision on the timetable that has been suggested, i.e. by May next year, that it has to take much, much longer, and that there needs to be very careful thinking about all different possible solutions, not just the English votes for English laws or the separate English Parliament, but also devolution within England. And the difficulty is that there is no constitutional solution that makes sense. So you have to get some kind of lovely British fudge, but quite what that fudge should be is not a subject on which there's any clear answer at all. And just quickly in response to Elias's point, if I may, so yes, I agree that civic nationalism was a much bigger element here than in many cases. And I agree also that there was a kind of positive discourse about we can create a new, better kind of democracy. I think that was probably a fairly narrow discourse in the elite of the Yes movement. I don't think it stretches very deep through that movement. So you know, we saw the fact that economic deprivation is associated with the Yes vote. So I think a negative feeling towards politics as a whole, and a cynicism that anything good could ever come from Westminster was very powerful. A bit of an idea that some kind of change might make things better. But I think it was only a fairly narrow elite that thought specifically Scotland can do things better. Scotland can be a better sort of democracy.
I think this is something that political scientists somehow have to elucidate that part, because it's fundamental, not least for understanding the Scottish situation, but perhaps from making sure that this is considered as a precedent. It does not trigger, perhaps, or used to trigger a domino effect in other areas or situations where clearly there you have a nationalistic primary and main sort of engine for the outcome of secession. As opposed, I totally agree with Elias on that ground. Yeah?
Yeah, I'll try to be short. So there was a question about the, from at the end, cutting taxes and the ECB supporting this with quantitative easing, basically, right? I think, so economically that's probably viable in the short to medium run, so both to push investment as well as consumption, right? But the problem really with this is also that it doesn't necessarily seem politically viable, because you need to also cut government spending if you do that, right? In terms to at least, not increase deficits too much when you cut taxes. And I think, it's a redistributive problem as well, right? Because if you cut public good provision, then you might lose elections out of it. So I think, so economically probably something we could do, but politically probably not viable. So then the question about who exits first, right? I think that's a coordination problem. So the one thing, so it's not necessarily that the suggestion was for the EMU to break up completely, right? Like, for example, it could form a northern monetary union and a southern monetary union. And I guess from this perspective, as somebody before said, France would be also a very crucial player, because France has a very strong position in the monetary union. And so France would actually move either way, right, given their current economic policies and political positions in terms of trade, exports, and imports. So I think that it's really a question of coordination and not so much of total breakup. Of course, if you face total breakup, then if you be first, then you can deflate first, and then that allows you to actually probably deflate your way out of the debt crisis a little bit faster. So, and the last question was about how does trade, surplus, deficit, and fiscal policy comes together. I mean, somebody has to finance the fiscal, the trade deficit, and in the southern European countries, it was government. So government bonds were issued in order to finance the inflow of capital. So
trade. I'm confused.
You have to finance the trade deficit, right? So the government financed the trade deficit basically by issuing government bonds.
Are you saying that this is what happened, or that this?
Yeah, that's what happened. Yeah, that's what happened, and that's why. And so I mean, in the Asian crisis, it was a private bank financed the deficit, right, or the trade deficit, but now it's mostly a sovereign debt crisis, right, because governments finance the trade deficits with government issuing government bonds, and of course, the higher the debt, the higher the probability of a default, that you cannot serve the debt, and that's why the interest rates quite increased again during the crisis. And then I did not completely understand the questions about wage convergence, and that you need a trade imbalance for wage conversion. Is that what you said? Right?
Yeah, I think we disagree about the whole trade deficit, about what causes it. So how do you identify the causality that it goes from a trade deficit to a fiscal deficit? Why is
Because
it
the trade deficit is financed
why is
by...
the trade deficit the fundamental bit?
Because you import more than you export, so capital has to flow in, right?
Why is it not the other way?
May I use my prerogative here as the chairman?
Yeah.
Not royal prerogative.
No, it's
Okay. Perhaps it would be a good idea over a cup of coffee to elaborate a little bit further. Vera, if you don't mind, let's wrap it up.
Sure.
Yes. I would like to thank the panelists and the very lively debate that ensued. We will reconvene at 3:15 for the next session.
Okay.
So you have plenty of time for an